When I returned to Nottingham in autumn 1964, there was no liberal synagogue, only the Orthodox congregation, and some of the people who were interested in joining the progressive group had been converted to progressive Judaism, and they were not, of course, acceptable to the Orthodox congregation. There had, in fact, been a group of people interested in creating a progressive Jewish group over the last couple of years, but nothing had been achieved. There were no services, no synagogue, no congregation. Invited some people to our home in Woollerton Park, and that meeting was on Wednesday, the 9th of March 1965, to discuss the formation of a progressive Jewish group. And about a dozen or so people came. And in that meeting lay the origin of the congregation. And it was agreed there that 3 public meetings would be held. The first, in fact, was addressed by a Reform rabbi, the second by a Liberal rabbi, and the third elected a committee at which I became the honorary secretary. Our efforts to build a congregation were met with great hostility by members of the Orthodox congregation. And some people, and I'd been brought up in that congregation, and there were people who were my friends in it, but they ostracized us, and some wouldn't speak to us. I think they regarded me as a pariah. Having said that, I remain immeasurably proud that this thriving congregation grew from that meeting all those years ago in our house.
Congregation grew, it needed a home of its own, and in 1970 the council were persuaded to take this piece of land in Lloyd Street, Sherwood.
Danny Rubens takes up the story of the building.
Nathan Harris lived very close by, and in one of his walks with his dog, he found this plot of land on the other side of Mansfield Road, because he lived very close by, and reported it to me. Only, at a guess, 40 or 45 members at that precise moment, and it would have been very adventurous of us to consider building a shul on the expectation that it was going to grow and become something of an entity in the city. Okay, so we had a council meeting at my house, 10 Hollis Drive, and John Hall sat in the chair, and Martin Bramlin Barber was there as one of the members, and myself and various other people. The subject about building a shul was equivocal because certain members said, no, primarily we must have a rabbi first and then a shul. I didn't agree with this, and neither did 1 or 2 other people. I said, well, if you've got a building, people can recognize it, that you're here to stay, and that this is an address for them to come to. Whereas if you've got a rabbi, you haven't got any footings. So they agreed with this, that the building should come first, and somewhere along the line, we would have a rabbi. John Hall, because I'd spoken too much, and my feelings were being expressed, turned round to me and said, Danny, he says, well, I can see you're enthusiastic about the building, so I'm going to give you the authority to go ahead with it. I bit my tongue of trying to start to create a building without any forethought, no thanks, no plans, nothing, just a blank piece of paper. First thing, I said to Martin, you're sitting in as chief officer of the Conservative local council. What committees are you on? So he said, well, I can be on that committee if you want. I said, well, can you secure the land? Because it's no use me talking about trying to build something if you've got nothing to put it on. So off went Martin and did his stuff, and he got 100 years on peppercorn, which you all know about, okay, which then gave us the right to start looking around. We got a piece of land, and that was the starting point. And I went to Keith, and I explained that I'd been given 2 crosses and a loaf of bread, actually more like Jesus, which is 2 loaves of bread and a piece of fish, to raise cash and to build a building. So can we talk about it? So Keith was not very knowledgeable about how do you build a shul. So I rang a friend of mine, Ronnie Simmons. Ronnie and Pearl Simmons were friends, good friends. He had a very well-established building company, and he was also the president of the Shakespeare Street at the same time, which were frowning on our efforts to expand our liberal, well, it wasn't liberal at the time, shul. I got a meeting in Keith's office with Ronnie Simmons, and the 3 of us sat around the table to decide exactly what we could and couldn't do. And with Ronnie's help on guiding it through how a shul should look and what our expectations were, and Keith's knowledge of builders and so forth, we put a package together. I then had to go and raise funds. We raised some funds from ULPS on interest-free terms and conditions over so many years. There were 1 or 2 benefactors who were quite prepared to put something of consequence down to form the budget. I decided to build the shul on the same model and shape as the one at Roman Bank, the Reform Shul, where I'd been married, in Leeds. It was an obvious thing to do. Even today I think about it, it must be a miracle. Then we're at top of the pocket and we build a building.
I've heard it described as an act of faith.
Well, it was. And Wilf Myron used to use that expression, an act of faith, and it was.
And here are some of the members of the original congregation that helped to make this dream a reality.
And on October the 1st, 1972, the new shul was inaugurated. It was a most momentous occasion, with the service of dedication being conducted by 2 rabbis, Sidney Brichto and David Goldberg. And the Lord Mayor of Nottingham was there to add his seal of approval. During the Second War, over 1,500 Torah scrolls were taken by the Nazis from synagogues all over Bohemia and Moravia. They were stored in an old shul in Prague. In 1964, they were purchased and brought over to London's Westminster Synagogue, and thus the Czech Memorial Scrolls Trust was formed. When the congregation was founded in 1965, it applied for and received one of these scrolls on permanent loan, and in 2015 a further scroll was obtained.
And so, 50 years later, we have a shul that is the heart of a thriving congregation, serving both as a place of worship and somewhere for the community to gather for all sorts of occasions.